Thing standing inside a huge stone fortress, where the cold in the air bites harder than the blizzard howling outside. Your breath turns to mists with every exhale. The icy air burns your lungs. Nor even several feet thick walls can keep warmth. For the howling wind boasts every chink and cranny, and narrow windows turn it into a frozen howling wind through this castle. A frozen howling wind labyrinth of stone and shadow. This isn't taken from some fantasy novel, but from actual life. For hundreds of years, this is what people in European castles lived. Behind the beauty, these castles' cold truth always prevailed. Today, we find out what was really meant by survival in these icy fortresses, why they were so hard to heat, and the clever tricks people came up with to avoid freezing to death. The Fortress of Cold. Medieval castles were not built for the comfort of their inhabitants, since their first function was defensive towards sieges, arrows, and even battering rams. The exact strength of these structures would in turn be their undoing during winter. Thick stone walls, so efficient at repelling enemies, also would absorb and hold the cold. Stone was an excellent conductor of temperature. It was almost as if the whole castle were one gigantic refrigerator. When frost covered the land outside, the walls themselves would take on an icy chill, radiating cold throughout every chamber within the castle. The floors inside the great halls felt icy to bare feet. No matter how heavily clad, even in 70 woolen strands, which most people today could never afford, there was no warmth in or under the clothes. Only radiation from the floor warmed those within, from ankle up to knee level and to waist level. High ceilings and great halls and large rooms built for feasts and ready more impossible to be heated. Warm air rose up to escape through the rafters and small windows. Ventilation, which would carry the smoke, also carrying out the warm air, created endless drafts. Even with fires blazing, castles were cold. Life in the shadows of winter. Life in these conditions was a battle. The castle's design was built with thick arches, stone floors, and narrow openings, trapped cold at every corner. It was the floors that were most deadly with fearsome chill, as they were laid right upon the ground. Boots of that day did not have inside warmth, and feet soon grew none. Castles were put up atop hill, good for defense but open to the harsh winds. The arrow slits let in gusts and warped doors, so there were always drafts. It didn't matter where you stood, the cold followed. The air was so cold with the things people would see their breath inside. Even breathing seemed like inhaling ice. The small windows let in a little light, and most of the rooms were in gloomy twilight. Torches and candles flickered weakly in the darkness there. Little heat came from them. It was daily and nightly pressure. Every part of it urging on that struggle to live, to keep body and spirit above dead level.
Fighting the cold. The open hearths were really the heart of any castle. Simple pits or fireplaces where logs burned day and night. But they were terribly inefficient. The smoke filled the air despite the small openings in the roof to let it out. The walls turned black with soot, and the room reeked of smoke, staining anything in it, the clothes,
furniture, even food. Later improvement was the wall-mounted fireplaces. This helped a bit since only the nearby areas were left with some warmth. Further on, the cold continued to be relentless. Further, there was the issue of the amount of firewood it took to heat such large buildings. Whole forests were consumed in a single winter. In the fierce months of the year, life was contracted to 1 or 2 rooms that were heated. The lords and ladies, servants, and any guests all crowded around the same fire. There was no privacy, only warmth, and that was survival. The labor and care of gathering, dressing, and keeping the wood has been a great charge, and so many times it chanced that if this were wanting, then would the whole castle find frost. Peat and coal were also where available. Peat smoked badly, but it burned fairly long. Coal gave better results, but was bad in filling rooms with dense smoke, although much hotter, but generally, peat was long-burning coal and rare and costly. It was expensive and gave more good heat than peat. Wood still was the lifeblood of every winter, its flickering flames the only barrier between life and frost. Walls that breathed cold, Castle builders over time came to realize that even the mortar between the stones itself crumbled, leaving tiny gaps with the cold absorbing the air seeping through and the warmth escaping. Windows, no glass there. Rough wood shutters, and those but badly warped admit entrance to every blast of wind. People had all sorts of ingenious ideas to fence in the tiny bit of heat their homes were giving off. Soon, tapestries and thick woolen hangings were a necessity. Hung against the walls, they created an insulating layer that broke the force of the cold stone and cut down the draft. A good deal of the bedroom's space was thus curtained off entirely into what looked like becoming little rooms within rooms. At night, beds turned into strongholds of heat. Heavy wooden frames, stuffed with straw or feathers, blankets of wool and furs, drawn tight around the bed, kept the sleeper's body heat. They sometimes heated stones or metal water bottles, with which they would wrap in blankets to warm them before sleep. Even so, the nights were cruel. The fire would die down, the temperatures would drop tremendously. People would sleep in several layers of clothing. Linen shirts, woolen tunics, cloaks, even hats. Oftentimes families, servants, and sometimes their visitors were found sleeping together, just for the purpose of getting all the warmth as well as a feeling of security in the process. Tapestries, furs, and ingenuity. Decorative pieces served as insulation. From the hunts and battle scenes, which were woven in wool tapestries supported with rich colors, one might accumulate a great fortune. Others were hanging behind the chairs or around beds to form enclosed warm spaces. So was fur. Fox, bear, sable, all lined their clothing and covered their chairs. Spread upon stone floors, the more furs a man had, the higher his status, and the warmer his life. Even the servants would have to make do with any scraps found, cobbling them into some kind of covering or wrap. The evolution of warmth. Over the centuries, people looked for better ways to combat the cold. Stoves enclosed, of brick or tile, replaced open fires in colder countries such as Germany and Scandinavia. These stoves retained the heat for hours and diffused it evenly to produce a uniform warmth. Tiled stoves were practical and were beautiful, with glazes of different colors and carved patterns. They were not usually installed in older castles, for it meant building new chimneys and walls. The later castles had them from the first beginning, and it was from this period that there began to be some comfort in the castles. Even some of the castles had rather simple heating, with the stove's hot air directed through hollow walls and floors, quite an early form of central heating, although such luxuries were rare. Life inside a castle, therefore, was for most a battle against the cold. Fuel, the precious resource, in winter, firewood was as good as gold. It decided who would be warm and who would freeze to death. The whole summer had been passed in cutting, hauling, and stacking up the logs. Each heap in the yard stood for riches wealthy, most times in the lord's private rooms. It was disastrous to run out of fuel. When the siege was laid, or great snow fell and deliveries ceased, the castle could become an ice prison. As firewood ran low and the rooms grew cold with frost crawling across the walls and beds, all warmth that could be found was that of the human body, huddled beneath blankets and prayers. Fashion as armor. The clothes were made as protection from the cold. Toss aside those beautiful dresses and tunics seen in films. Real medieval clothes were layered and heavy. Wooled or lined underlinen was put over by several tunics, cloaks, and robes. Fur trimmed the collar, sleeve, and hem of garments so that it became easy to carry insulation. Men's and women's headwear and hand coverings indoors were in practice. Sitting at the table dressed in all winter clothes was not an uncommon practice, since inside great halls were as cold as outside the courtyards. Dark clothing was preferred not only for fashion, but also because it absorbed heat as well as dirt, in a world where getting things clean was unusual. The style was life. To dress like a cabbage, some said in jest, was to live one more day without freezing. A gradual transformation. As time went on, architecture adjusted. Builders put in inside walls to catch warm air, added chimneys in almost every room, and made it smaller, more insulated chambers. Windows became tighter, sometimes with glass panes, a luxury that transformed both light and warmth. Some later castles even added specific warming rooms, small chambers kept constantly hot so that inhabitants could thaw after going out into the cold halls. Some even hung heavy curtains across their doorways to keep off the cold piped through those channels. Thus, by degrees, castles ceases to be bare military keeps and grows houseable. But the winter within continued to be cruel, however great the fireplaces, roaring with smoke and people huddled in layers, praying for spring. The enduring battle against the cold. Today, when we marvel at castles as spectacles, we often forget what people sitting inside those big walls must have gone through. Yet inside these icy fortresses, the determination of the human spirit was hotter than any flame. If you lived in a medieval castle, which trick would you choose to survive the winter? A blazing hearth, worn furs, or thick curtains around your bed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember, in the Middle Ages, warmth wasn't comfort, it was life itself. Comfort was a privilege earned through effort, chopping wood, tending fires, layering clothes, and huddling close together. And yet, these people endured. They found ways to create moments of warmth and beauty within the cold, through flickering fires, rich tapestries. What they had found was how to make a little warmth and beauty among all that cold, most often, through flickering fires and rich tapestries, laughter shared, and sheer determination to live. Today, when we marvel at castles as spectacles, we often forget what people sitting inside those big walls must have gone through. Yet inside these icy fortresses, the determination of the human spirit was hotter than any flame. If you lived in a medieval castle, which trick would you choose to survive the winter? A blazing hearth, warm furs, or thick curtains around your bed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember, in the Middle Ages, warmth wasn't comfort, it was life itself. Comfort was a privilege earned through effort, chopping wood, tending fires, layering clothes, and huddling close together. And yet, these people endured. They found ways to create moments of warmth and beauty within the cold, through flickering fires, rich tapestries, shared laughter, and will to survive. Today, when we admire castles as grand monuments, we rarely imagine how their inhabitants shivered behind those majestic walls. But inside those frozen fortresses, humanity's resilience burned brighter than any fire. If you lived in a medieval castle, which trick would you choose to survive the winter? A blazing hearth, warm furs, or thick curtains around your bed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember, in the Middle Ages, warmth wasn't comfort, it was life itself.